Good evening and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings you the law, the Constitution, and the events of the day to you each month. Tonight, myself, James Barrett, and Mark Malachowski are here to bring you three exciting subjects. What do we got tonight, Mark?
Well, we have Aretha Franklin, who is the Queen of Soul, and there's a little dust up over her legacy, $80 million. And then we get
That's a lot of dust.
That's a lot of dust. And then David Cassidy, there's a fight between
a little bit of dust.
his half-daughter and his son, and that's over $1.7 million. And then there's a Prop 13 exclusion, and kind of what are some of the circumstances going on that?
Well, that involves trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about Prop 13, but we're not going to start with that. So why don't we start with RESPECT? What does that mean to me, Mark?
Okay, well, the Queen of Soul made these great hits like Respect, Chain of Fools, Natural Woman. She earned $80 million.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And, but now there's going to be a feud between her kind of live-in guy, right, who wanted to marry her some time ago, and they were engaged, but the children said, no, 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 you're not going to, the son said, no, you can't marry her. And so they called off the engagement. Now, that was in 2012. Now that there's the inheritance issue, there's a war between the sons and the live-in boyfriend.
Okay, well, what I
30 years. 30
yeah,
years.
well, what I understand about this is that I know there's probably an argument for common law marriage, but in the state they're in, the worst part is, okay, she's a huge star with a huge portfolio behind her. She has proprietary rights. She's won 18 Grammys. This woman, if nothing else, deserved to have an estate attorney. Well, she died intestate. No will, no trust. But in her state, the only way an intestate succession can happen is you divide between the sons. And they have to be the natural sons of the person that became deceased. And unfortunately, her husband, who was not legally her husband, is going to have a long fight to try and beat that law, which has been in place since the beginning of the state.
Yeah, and I think the sons are ready to fight, and they've been kind of paying attention to this the whole time. You know, apparently they fought to stop the marriage from coming.
For a reason.
You know, now if the marriage had come through, then it'd be a completely different thing. But
and he may have taken half right off the top.
And so, and I guess the question is, why didn't she do a will? Why didn't she do a trust? We're talking about $80 million here. I think she probably could have afforded a lawyer, but a lot of entertainers don't like lawyers.
She's not the first. Prince, no attorney.
Right, and so they have, you know, they get in dust-ups with the agents and dust-ups with the different producers, and they get a bad taste in their mouth for attorneys. And also, I think maybe they think, well, I'm successful at entertainment. Maybe I can successfully handle my own paperwork, but it doesn't always work out.
No, in fact, the problem was that Aretha Franklin was kind of an old world entertainer in the fact that she even demanded to be paid in cash instead of checks or wire transfers. She wanted all her pay before her shows in cash. And she actually kept the cash by the stage as she performed so she could keep her eye on her cash. I got to tell you, that's fairly old world there, Mark. So you got to think about who this woman was. Also, they said that she kept her finances almost completely private from her family, from the live-in, the alleged common law husband, but she didn't tell. So everybody didn't really know. They knew she had a lot of money, but they didn't know how she controlled it, what she did with it, how she stored it or saved it. And so that's actually where they feel that that's why she didn't do a will. She didn't want anyone to have a clue of what she actually had.
Well, that's a good theory. You know, she was very prolific, though, and she was busy doing a lot of things.
All the time.
And so she probably was busy doing these things, and she kind of thought, well, I'll do this later. A lot of people think, I'll get to this later, and then, you know, later never happens.
Yeah.
So that's, but it's kind of interesting. The guy who's the Detroit firefighter, who's 7 years old now, Willie Wilkerson, they've been going together for 30 years.
I know, it's a long
time,
So that's
Mark. A long time. And, you know, I think that, you know, there could be a lot of juries or judges that would be sympathetic
to
to
this.
that and say, well, 30 years, he should get part of the piece of the action here. You know, he did support her all those years.
Well, you know, it'd be the best recommendation is get the sons together in a room and say, you got to cut this guy a little bit of money from each of you and end this before it turns into the war of years. It could be 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, who knows how long, fighting. And the worst part is, because the money was from an intestate succession, literally, it can be held before distribution. If the court says, we hold the money, except for a little bit of money to live on, whatever, they can hold the entire race of the estate and say, we're not going to distribute any of this until you guys work it out.
Well, yeah, also, you know, you're not dealing with the trust, so the court's intimately involved.
Oh, my God, it's automatic probate all over the place.
And, you know, in case people aren't really aware of this, in the olden days, you know, when you had the Rockefellers and all that, they were the only one who had trusts, right? And so they worked it out basically so everybody else but the very rich people who ran the banks, you know, they invented the IRS and the banks and all that kind of stuff and the Federal Reserve, but they're only were going to tax the regular worker. The people who ran the banks,
they didn't want to be taxed.
They're not going to be taxed. So they always had foundations or trusts, right? And then, you know.
It's all for the good.
Yeah, well, yeah.
The good of their family.
Yeah, right. So, so that was the way it ran for many years. And then they came up with this living trust, and that was more for the common folk.
The common people.
Yeah, and so you don't have to be a Rockefeller to have a living trust. And the thing about the living trust is there's generally, you know, about 6%, you know, say basically 35,000 out of a million that goes to the executor and 35,000 out of the million that goes to an attorney, and 70,000 out of your million, which is a fair amount, you know, somewhere in that range. And there's some sliding scales, but after a million, it kind of slows down. I mean, you don't get.
Oh yeah, and the probate, you know about I know you do a lot of probate.
So, but I'm just saying you can be in probate court for a long time.
And see, you know why? Because the longer you're there, the more percentages the attorney earns because they're structured. But here's the thing. The structure is based on the value, not the length of time.
But you can get extraordinary fees, but that's a battle.
Yeah,
but it's a battle.
Yeah, you would have to file extraordinary fees.
Well, I mean, the thing is, there's huge areas of law, just not extraordinary fees. I mean, in fact, there's probably more law on that
than probate law.
Yeah.
You know why? Because every attorney wants to get paid for the work they do.
And so, but I'm saying, so that's something that right off the bat they came up with this living trust. And so, generally, what happens? People put their house in that trust, and that doesn't have to go through probate and get hung up on that. And so she didn't do that. So this is back in probate court, and that gives the judge a lot of discretion.
Oh boy!
And also, things take a while to wind their way through the courts.
They always take a long time, especially with probate. Depending on the probate bar in that county where all this came about.
Any civil stuff now, because I think what they did, they said, well, if it's a cost savings thing, we're going to fire her, we're going to lay off all the clerks, right? And the clerks were really kind of the people who
did all the work,
kept everything running smoothly. And now they said, well, we'll do it all. Well, probate may be an exception. We're going to do electronic filing. And of course, you've got somebody, you know, giving you exceptional service in Bombay or something, but you know, it's more fouled up than it's ever been. And so what they were trying to do, like a lot of things, like Amazon or whatever, they're trying to get rid of all the people.
Well, they're trying to make it all automated.
Right.
But you know what? In the court system, you still need somebody to look at something.
Well,
so what happens is there has to be eyes, because it can't just be the computer says, it looks okay to me, it looks okay to me. There's somebody's going to still have to look at it, and that's why they're still going to need that no matter what happens.
Well, the thing is, even if you file electronically, you still have to deliver a paper courtesy copy.
You got to do all the papers, still got to go.
So it's just another 3 layers, and so that really doesn't speed up the process. In fact, it tends to slow it down.
Yeah.
And so, you know, things going through, and I think it's basically they laid off a lot of clerks.
Well,
and,
you know,
it does take longer to go through.
What I want to do, because this just happened, I think what we ought to do is revisit Aretha when they start really pulling this apart. So, Mark, what's our second subject for the night?
Okay, then we have David Cassidy, who was the Partridge Family, you know, the heartthrob of the Partridge Family.
Partridge Family.
And you know,
any of those songs?
Child actor, and he had a fling, and the result of that fling was a half-daughter named Katie. And David explicitly disinherited her in the will.
Oh, that's so evil. What did Katie do to David?
And so, but Katie, well, I don't know what Katie did to David, but Katie did change her name to Cassidy.
Well, it sounds like she wanted something out of David.
And so, and then she had a handwriting expert who claims that David's signature on the will, which explicitly disinherits her. You know, there's no, it's pretty plain as day that, you know, Katie gets nothing, right?
Well, actually, Mark, you and I reviewed that paragraph. And if that paragraph was...
It's a well-written paragraph.
It's a well-written paragraph.
It's not ambiguous.
It's not and there's no ambiguity here. Katie is written out of the will, and it's in capital letters in a whole line.
Well, there's another sentence like she's written out of the will. No, she's really
She's really written out of the will because it says one thing and then it says, let me repeat it again. She is not going to get a dime from my will.
And so everything's supposed to go to Beau, who is...
Beau.
His son, who's his natural born son, and I guess it's 1.7 million, which is kind of surprising because you would think he'd be richer.
Well, you wonder about who owned the rights to his music.
Yeah, but
did he sell the rights?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, you know, also he was a child actor. He might have signed some stuff without.
Maybe his parents looted him.
Getting it reviewed or something like that. But it's only 1.7 million, but it's still a fair piece of change.
Well, okay. Here's the thing about this.
But I mean, there might be some residuals in there too. You never know.
There's more to the sad story. The real sad story that might answer your question, why there's only 1.7 million in assets at all or whatever. Unfortunately, David had a really severe drinking problem for about 30 years. And he wasn't really performing. He started sobering up in the last year or two. But what happened was because his best prime earning years just didn't happen. He could have magnified that money substantially if he was out there doing the routes like the Monkees did and all the old TV shows did. Everyone kept coming back, and even, what was it, Marianne from Gilligan's Island, they're all going back and doing stuff, right? And so they keep the generation of cash going. And he had, because he was in the Partridge Family, with the real Partridge Family, and they were in a band, and they had music, he could have been doing revivals and tours and all that stuff that would have made that estate a little larger. So I believe some of this whole issue with Katie was probably revolving over his alcoholism and whatever. Now, he died of complete organ failure. I mean, he must have been doing a lot of something because your body just doesn't shut down. He's way younger than I was when he died, so it didn't really just shut down. It was induced by his actions. Now, do you believe that's probably one of the reasons why him and Katie just didn't get along? Was it over his degenerated acts or what?
Well, I think what happens when you have child actors who are very famous, and it's kind of like a gift that kind of comes to them, right? And then after you're not a child anymore and they're going like, we really can't use you, I think a lot of child actors have a very stressful kind of fall from grace. And like you're saying, some can reinvent themselves and do these comebacks, but it's not like their original thing. And so, you know, like anybody thinks, okay, this is going to go on forever, and when it doesn't, you know, that's tough on them, and some people can handle that stress better than others. So I don't know if you can really judge what it's like to be
there's no way I can judge.
Famous, and then finally be, no, we can't use you because you're gotten old now, right?
Well, actually, the stress on child actors is
huge.
Way magnified compared to actors that start later.
Right.
And it's like the Disney kids. If you look at the gang of Disney kids, Miley Cyrus, what's it, Alba. There's like one after another. Ariana Grande and this one, Justin Bieber. Come on, a lot of them go through hell, but then they get out of that hell. And everyone I just named has gone through hell of all hell because there's that Disney lag where either you're going to keep going and go up or you're going to lag and you're going to go, well, I'm a Mouseketeer. But unfortunately, the Mouseketeer, do you have any dope? And so what happens next is if they don't continue in the process, then they fall by the wayside. Now, even the ones that did the process but had good people around them made it. Like Justin Bieber's a classic, not Justin Bieber, but what's his name? The singer, the other Justin Timberlake. All these guys and girls that have anyone around them that really cares, they get out of that doldrum, because they fall into the doldrum and then they rise out of it. And when they rise out of it, that's when you continue on with your career. Now, my fear with a lot of the people from the 70s, they just dropped off and then didn't have that support network to drag them up in the 80s.
Right.
And so David could have easily had that. And that could have easily created a problem with Katie. Now, Katie, on the other hand, probably has more net worth than he did. And she's been in a couple of TV shows. She's been in, I think, a movie or two. So she's been around the block a little bit.
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting. She did a legal name change to Cassidy.
Yeah, to Cassidy.
Even though her mom wasn't married to him. And I think that she's maybe seeing this relationship or this association is a way she can kind of spin this.
You're right.
And even this publicity, which might be bad publicity, is better than no publicity at all. And
who else has said that?
Our
president said that a lot.
So I would say that, you know, I think that this would probably, she's looking at this now, whether there was affection between them or not. Apparently her mom and David Cassidy didn't know each other that well.
Well, Sherry Williams, her mom,
right,
was actually a singer that David Cassidy met, and I think they might have performed together.
Right.
And so it was a very short-term relationship.
It was a fling.
Very short-term relationship, but she was a singer.
Yeah, but I'm just saying it wasn't like they lived together or anything. I think it was a fling.
They didn't even, there wasn't even intent. It was a, who knows, it could have been a one-night stand, it could have been a one-year stand or a one-month stand. From what my sources looked at, it was a fling. It was
like
a fling.
Yeah, like a weekend or something.
Jeez, a weekend in Acapulco.
Yeah, so I mean, but I'm not exact on that, but that's the way they described it. So I don't think it was like a month or 2 months. So, you know.
Wow, that's no wonder. Maybe he just had no.
Well, he just felt that he was kind of being put upon about this, but then he did have the child. They did have the child, so so that's a half. That's a half child.
But Mark,
that's a half daughter.
Why? Okay, in your mind, why would somebody make such a dramatic writing if he didn't want anything to do with this person? That's the question mark.
I mean, I think it's a classic thing where probably the half daughter thinks she's being abandoned, right, unfairly, and you know he's kind of like I didn't marry, you know, this lady. You know, this isn't. You know, I want to take care of Beau, and you know, it's a classic dichotomy when you have, you know, well, nowadays a lot of people don't get married, right?
Yeah. Well, anyway, so, on that happy note of not getting married, we go into our third subject tonight. And what is that subject?
Okay, this is Proposition 13.
Whoa.
And what?
Hail 13.
What Proposition 13 is that. You know, property taxes kept going up and up and up, and people were watching the government, and they were saying that the government really didn't do much.
A bunch of greedy people.
Well, they didn't see the government doing much that they wanted the government to do anyway. That really hasn't changed much. I mean, people see the government and they go, well, I pay money to the government, and the government kind of does the opposite of what I want them to do. And the government says, well, we have guns, we do what we want, pretty much. And so that's kind of the response. So, you know, in Proposition 13, there was kind of a rebellion. It was a taxpayer rebellion. And they said, no, you can't just keep raising property taxes. You know, there's got to be a limit on this. And so that was kind of a big deal. And they said, well, you know, 1979, we're kind of putting the brakes on this raising of property taxes. And we're kind of going to look back at 1976 valuation or assessment values. And so that's what happened. And
well, that's the Jarvis.
But it really was a huge political thing now. And they also said, you know, if you're going to raise taxes, you have to have 2/3 of the legislature. And because people were looking at the government and saying, like, who are these guys? You know, I mean, they're spending money on stuff that doesn't help me. And they're spending money not only on stuff that doesn't help me, but the government's actually spending my money on stuff that are contrary to my interests.
Completely.
You know, and so it's like, here I'm paying somebody to hurt me. And so they went, now and ever since then, you know, there's been a huge backlash against Proposition 13 and anything Proposition 13's right. And now the government's kind of established that, yeah, you got to pay us to hurt us, right? And so that's kind of the way the government works now, is like, yeah, you pay us, we hurt you, and that's life, you know? So, but Proposition 13 is kind of hanging on by a string there. And we'll see what happens under Gavin Newsom and the new legislature.
Well, let me add something to this.
But it was a constitutional amendment. So.
Yes, but here's the thing: what people aren't associating with open borders and people coming to the country that have no ownership in anything, and then they want to make them voters. Well, they want to put their little gang of children in the schools. They want to make sure the prisons are nice for uncles that go to prison. They want to make sure the welfare is there because I want free money and free housing. So here's the deal. Where's that money coming from? It's got to come from the landowners,
right,
which has a traditional negative effect for a lot of the countries these people are coming from. Oh, the big landowner, evil man, evil man. But in our state, we have a lot of homeowners. Now, if people are going to vote more taxes to the homeowners, then those people should be landowners that are voting those taxes. And unfortunately, California is being saturated with people that don't own but want to vote taxes against the property owners. Now, Proposition 13 said the government can't keep taxing me double the tax every year with Proposition.
Well, I don't know if they were doubling, but I think
they were close to doubling.
I thought it was going up 5 or 6% a year.
No, well, it was different. And here's the worst part: it was different in where you were.
Right.
So the state codified that only 2% a year is your maximum increase until the home transfers ownership.
Right.
Then it gets reassessed at the new property value based on 1% of the new property value when that person sells their home. So now, what do you think happens when nobody wants to sell their properties? People are clamoring. So what do you do, Mark?
Well, I think what you've got is you really have Americans, and then you've got foreigners, right? And right now, California is not controlled by Americans; it's controlled by.
It's getting more and more controlled
No,
by
but it's
foreigners.
controlled by foreign bankers, right? And it's not controlled by Americans anymore, and it's not looking out for American interests. And so, of course, if you're a foreigner and you don't like Americans, what are you going to do? You're going to import more foreigners who have sympathies contrary to Americans.
Contrary to American citizens, yes.
So I mean, that's what we really have now. I mean,
and that's how Proposition 13 can be overturned.
Well, yeah.
And they're looking at that.
And so,
don't think they aren't drooling
no, that's
over
a big thing. And so right now, we are not really, we're basically what you would say, we're in occupied territory by foreign powers.
We are occupied.
And,
in fact, we're being invaded.
And then they're taking our tax money, laundering that through different nations, and then paying people the United Nations credit cards, right, and Israel and all this stuff. They're paying these people to come across the border.
To come across our border.
And so actually American taxpayer money is getting funneled through these foundations, through foreign countries that are laundering the money. They're paying people to invade us, right? And
I have a question,
and
Mark.
that's our taxpayer money.
I have a question. How much do you think this little caravan coming from Guatemala and Honduras costs a day?
Well, I'd say...
Where's the millions and millions and millions of dollars coming from?
But I mean, if you look at the black money that came into the last presidential election, right, into Hillary's election, Soros...
$1 billion
No,
plus.
Soros put $2 billion through the Cayman Islands, and that was just cash, right? That's not counting AIPAC and the white money, the money you see. That's like $500,000 here and $500,000 to every senator gets $500,000 to vote the right way, right?
Well, $500,000 one way or the other.
Yeah.
Between friends, what's the difference?
Yeah, but then, they probably get 5, 10, 15 million in the black, right? And so, in the briefcase. So, I mean, you got AIPAC, which is a foreign nation, right? But they don't register with FARA.
Of course they don't.
And so that's the white money.
But wait a minute, who got in trouble for that?
And so nobody gets in trouble for that. So I mean,
except if you're a pro-Trump guy.
Oh yeah, but I'm just saying nobody gets in trouble if you're working. So, but if you're working for the bankers, and so probably I would imagine this thing is, it's in the $500 million range, but they're using United Nations credit cards, right? They're using Israel trucks, and the food and all that stuff's all paid through our tax money, going back through that whole usual gang of, bankers and whatever, the foreign bankers who run our Federal Reserve, but it's taxpayer money. So we're paying to have the Honduras come in. But if you look at the deeper problem on that, right, there's actually we destabilized, our CIA destabilized Honduras and created this a few years ago, right? Because their guy was the Chavez, you know, he was going to be the next Chavez, right?
Yeah.
And so their Supreme Court says, get rid of this guy, and the Congress said, get rid of this guy, kick him out. And then our State Department goes, oh, no, we got to put Chavez back. So this was created by Soros there, too. So, I mean, this is a long...
Oh, you mean George was over there, too?
No, but he was
of
behind
course,
all.
George, right?
Yeah, so anyway...
George, where is George?
So anyway, Prop 13 is going to be under attack, but what it does is basically, one of the main things it does, if you're doing a parent-child transfer, right?
Thank God.
You don't have to be assessed, you know, at
The increased step-up value of the home or the property.
at today's value, right?
Yes.
So it's like the 1979 assessment. So you can retain that lower property tax and keep things in the family. But you got to look at the Soros people. The progressives don't like families.
They hate that.
They hate
oh, wait a minute, a family.
So that's
Whoa, it takes a village.
Yeah,
it takes a village.
So they don't want marriage.
Communist village.
They don't want families. And so this is really, you know, a real bastion to help families. And it gets kind of complicated. Like, say, if one sibling wants to keep the house and other siblings don't, then how do you preserve the exclusion, that kind of thing? And there's certain things with timber, and there's certain commercial exceptions. But however you work it out, if you can, it's a good idea to try to preserve this Prop 13.
Right.
But it's part of a much larger political thing going on now, where you basically have foreigners running California. They don't like Americans. They want to get rid of Americans.
And they sure don't like Proposition 13.
And like just like they're burning us out this month. They said,
Wow.
okay, you've got land, but you can't cut down the trees. You got to let the squirrels live, and then the whole place burns down. And so they're actually burning. They're actually burning us alive.
Well, let me tell you, on that happy note of letting the squirrels burn to the ground, and then Proposition 13 burning with it, we're going to say a fond farewell from Law Talk for our November special.
And don't take any deep breaths out there.
And don't breathe too deeply on there. Our state's burning down.
Yeah, it's like going to heck in a handbasket.
And by the way, where's George when you looked who lit that match?
Well, George is getting his deductions.
He's getting his deductions,
running
for sure.
Congress and the usual stuff that George does. So he's just running the country.
He's trying to bankrupt the company. Yeah, actually, he wants to undersell the dollar.
Well,
you know, he's making a fortune on the dollar.
Well, the thing about George is he gives, you know, like I said, he doles out the black money, and you got AIPAC doling out the above board money, but it's a huge amount of money. I mean, we're talking billions and billions of bribes.
Did you see how much was spent on the